It's a short webinar today, and it really revolves around a few questions we've been asked recently by customers who are trying to improve how they manage multiple projects in Jira. You could say project portfolio management. So we're just going to go through a few techniques we've discussed with various clients and how various people have approached it, and also some of the differences on a couple of well-known tools in the marketplace and how these work. And I hope you find it useful. Do give me any feedback afterwards, or if there's any questions you want to ask, please let me know and I'll try and deal with them at the end, or we can take them offline. So let's move to the next slide. Quick agenda here. I'm going to start with just a little bit about us. Obviously got to cover who we are and why we're here. And then I just want to quickly go over a basics recap on Jira. Many people have different levels of understanding on how Jira works, and it's important to know some of the basics just so you can see how different approaches can be applied to actually managing work with Jira. We're again going to just quickly cover projects and boards, Jira portfolio and big picture, and final slide, we'll give a nod just to time tracking, which is also something that comes up quite often. That is going to be the subject of a future webinar, although if you've got a burning time tracking issue out there, please just get in contact with us straight away, and we can talk about how one can do it. Again, this is based on some recent experience with clients. It's quite a popular topic. So a little bit about us. Some of you probably already know us. We're an Atlassian solution partner. We resell the software. We can do implementations and best practice, how to use Jira, how to manage work in Jira, test management using Zephyr, service desk implementations and development. These are all some of the things that we've done. We're also an Atlassian approved training partner, so we can deliver all the Atlassian training courses. There's a list of several of them on our website. We also a Zephyr partner. Zephyr, one of the most popular test management tools in Jira, and we've basically got the only Zephyr training course that's available anywhere. We also do custom workshops and courses as well if you're just looking to brush up on your knowledge. We have a couple of new products coming out soon. A product called Atlassian Care, which is really focused at people who just want assistance through the next 12 months. You get 5 consulting days and 20 remote consulting sessions, and you can use them how you want, when you want, string them together and so forth. TeamSource is a solution for people that are interested in engaging Atlassian resource in a longer-term fashion, such as a contractor, and we can help find excellent people in that regard, because obviously we know a lot of people in the community. So that's a little bit about us, and with no further ado, I will get into the presentation. So a quick recap on Jira itself. Jira is basically really a big pool of issues, typically grouped into projects. And within a given project in Jira, and hopefully you're also familiar with this, I've got some examples along the bottom: software projects and service desk projects. Within a project, it's possible to have a set of given issue types, typically things like epics, stories, bugs, and so forth. Components that are things that relate to that project, maybe such as web server, front end, database, and then ideas such as labels, releases, which is this concept of pieces of work that should be released at a given moment in time. They often will relate to a whole bunch of issues. And then issues can have custom attribution to capture information that doesn't come with the default setup. And again, that can be configured on a project-by-project basis. Basically, Jira projects are a good way of grouping relevant work items together, you could say. And then the work's typically displayed to users via dashboards, boards, and filters. Now, often we do see there is a straightforward one-to-one relationship with boards and projects. By board, I mean a Scrum board, for example, or Kanban board. However, boards can display information from many projects. Some of you will be very well aware of that, and others may not be, because Jira out of the box tends to create one project, and with that project it creates a board. And we've seen a variety of ways these have been used across different customers. JQL, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, stands for Jira Query Language. Simply a way of being able to write queries that bring back sets of issues across the whole Jira system. And JQL can query things across projects. So you might say, show me all the issues that are stories that need to be delivered by the end of the week with high priority across all my projects. Or more typically, you would just be doing it within a project. But JQL can give us the basis for developing filters and queries against Jira, which can then be used for higher level reporting across multiple projects. So, well, how to actually, I'm going to also cover not just the basics of how Jira works, but also how people in general work, and different companies work in different ways. I'm sure you see that yourselves. So how should you do work? Well, it depends. We often notice that companies that are very focused on providing products, understandably, tend to be very, very product oriented. And that is what their work tends to revolve around. Whereas companies that tend to provide services to, say, many clients can have really quite different work patterns. And this again is understandable because they may be doing using one pool of staff to execute multiple projects at the same time for different people. That can be quite different to a company that's got a small number of products and very focused teams. And this tends to break down into patterns where you may have like one team working across many projects, or you have several teams who are organized really via expertise, and their expertise is actually used across multiple projects as appropriate. Or sometimes you have one dedicated full stack team against one project. And there's a very broad outline again about how different people tend to work. And on top of that, we sometimes have the concept of a program. And a program is simply a big work item that can contain many projects. And this might be some sort of strategic initiative that a company has, but in order for that initiative to happen, many projects are actually going to have to be delivered, and that might ripple down to many different teams all doing the right thing at the right time. So, some inquiries we tend to get from customers, and this is a sort of selection, but it's a bit of a theme around this subject of program and work management. So the first one tends to come from more mature users who have brought Jira in probably to manage something quite small, maybe one particular project brought it in, started using it, other people saw how useful it can be, and other teams have started using it. And now we may have a situation, there are lots of administrators, lots of teams using it, and we have multiple projects, maybe with different statuses, different work patterns, and in essence we end up with a situation where somebody says, well, actually we've now got one place where we're managing all this work. Wouldn't it be great to know what's actually going on across all these different projects? But as this has happened in a rather ad hoc way over a period of time and has evolved, now nobody really knows what's going on. Other type of inquiry, broadly speaking, starting out with Jira, maybe they're coming from another sort of system. Basically, maybe everyone's using Excel, or perhaps some sort of service management system, such as Freshdesk, Topdesk, and so forth, which was originally brought in just to be as a service desk, but has sort of morphed into a project management tool, but now really they're outgrowing it. They recognise they've got multiple teams and projects, but want to know the best way of trying to approach this particular problem in the land of Jira. And the final one, which occasionally comes up, well, in fact, it's fairly universal, I think, is we use Microsoft projects and everyone hates it. Sometimes good reasons for that to be. Actually, MS Project does have good visualizations for Gantt. No doubt about that. The problem with something like project in the software world is that you tend to end up with very static plans, which unfortunately they can disassociate themselves from reality as work moves forwards. So those are sorts of some of the things that we get from customers. So if we sort of break that down into how we can sort of move forward, we then have questions, some basic questions about how one can configure Jira projects and boards. And, you know, broader questions, well, should you arrange your work in projects or teams? And actually, what is a project? This can give rise to different discussions, depending on if a customer doesn't really know much about Jira, but tends to think of their work in the traditional sense in terms of actual projects. Or if a customer is very Jira oriented and the person you're speaking to is very Jira oriented, and then they tend to think about projects in terms of Jira. So Jira projects, as we've discussed, is basically a bunch of typically related work items held within the Jira system. Project for the company can be quite different and usually connotes something actually that's got to be delivered, maybe product, new initiative, piece of work for a customer. Typically has a beginning, middle and end, phases, deliverables, and inside that's a whole ton of detail, dependencies and so forth. And actually the team has to work on that project to make it happen. So that's all well and good, but those are the sort of two rough entities that are out there. And ultimately, one is tending to work in a project type way, because if we're working for a company, we typically have work to do that must get done in order that the company can move forward. So there's a couple of different ways of doing this. Should you arrange your work in really by Jira projects or by your teams? So we've seen both approaches. Sometimes it starts out that people just create a Jira project per team, and that's absolutely fine if your team is really only working on one project, but it can start to get problematic if that's not the case. So if we do a by team sort of by team method, if you like, we're really looking at having Jira projects oriented around teams themselves. The board configuration is quite simple and it's very clear where all the work for the team is in that Jira project. But there are problems if we start working on multiple projects, which can, for example, happen if you're thinking about a move to sort of matrix management. Because now our team-based project, which was originally one company project, actually may morph into something that contains multiple company projects. So I've now got one Jira project holding multiple company projects. And this can cause some difficulties in terms of reporting. And there's certainly ways around it. But typically, in order to identify the progress of company projects within a single Jira project, we have to start using custom fields such as project, program. These have to be maintained. And the reporting can be more fiddly around it. Now, if actually there's quite a mature system which is configured like this, one can basically sort of take that on the chin and try and make it more maintainable by the use of add-ons, better management of custom fields and filters and so forth for reporting. But it can become more and more complex. For example, you might end up with more and more projects residing in your one sort of jumbo project. And it's not an academic point we're making. We've seen this happen. The other way of doing things is managing, sort of aligning Jira projects to your company projects. And in this case, as all things are pros and cons, it's now very clear where all the work for a company project is and where it should be entered. If you want to create a new task for a project, it simply goes in the relevant Jira project. It's quite easy to report on the progress of the company project because the reports are fairly much vanilla and you know where all the work is. You can use pretty much standard boards. What's also quite nice about this is the Confluence spaces can be directly linked, so it's very clear where documentation resides. And I'd say sort of from a testing point of view, you know, requirements documentation are the root of all evil. You really do want clarity over what it is you're working on. And in that sense, the clarity of a space linked to a project, we know where the work is, we know where the documentation is, I think has benefits to it. But what if your team is working on multiple projects? The thing I've just outlined there is all well and good if you've got a one-to-one relationship between your team and your project. That's fine. But if it's not like that, then we have a problem in that the workloads for your teams are not so obvious. It's now easy to see where the project is, but it's not necessarily easy to see what your actual staff should be doing. So if you have a situation whereby you're not doing one-to-one mapping between a team and a project, which many people are not, our suggestion, generally speaking, is that you map your Jira projects onto your company projects. You try and make Jira, where possible, sort of reflect the real world of what is going on within your company, and it just makes it a bit easier to understand. Makes it clear where work and documentation is for projects. This still leaves us with the issue of how to show teams what work they are doing. And as I mentioned earlier, boards can span multiple projects. So what we would generally do is suggest that one creates appropriate filters for teams which pull together the work across multiple related Jira projects that your teams are working on. These filters then can be maintained if you introduce more projects down the line. And then we apply boards on top of these filters, boards or dashboards in fact. And then these boards or dashboards can provide the actual work in progress views that it's really important for teams to have. The view that says, you know, what work is the team doing today. Now, as I've said, if actually your teams and your project work is one-to-one, that's fine. You can do this, you can have quite an easy situation whereby you have single Jira project, single board, or maybe a few boards if you want summaries presented to teams. But actually multiple teams against multiple projects, this solution tends to work well out of the available pool of solutions there are. And we'd say that because it gives you the benefit of your project managers can see the progress of projects. It's easy to see where projects are, what's going on. But you do get the benefit of teams that are working on those projects understanding what their workload actually is. There are some tips trying to make this work correctly and consistently. So for a start, try to be consistent. Now, this can be awkward. I'd appreciate that if your system has already been up and running for some time, and it's like I alluded to earlier, where maybe you have a whole different bunch of projects out there and there's no real consistency between them. You may need an exercise where we try and bring some consistency to this. In an ideal world, especially if you're starting, we would try and identify the various types of project that you have. For example, you may have development projects that work in a fairly similar way. Now, if you can have that and identify those, we can then create Jira project templates which operate consistently. There are add-ons available to make this really slick, and even without an add-on, you can use schemes and roles so that when you create a new project from a template project, you will get a consistent set of issue types, workflows, roles, and so forth. And all you have to do is assign the right people to the roles in the project, and your projects will operate consistently, and it's easy to report across them. It's really good if we can try and have sort of common statuses. So for an example, avoid, done, finished, sorted, which all basically mean the same thing. It really doesn't help one's reporting if you need to know 10 different status types in order to find all issues that are in a common state. Make Confluence and Jira as straightforward as possible to use. It helps sort of new starters, it helps management, it helps everyone. Okay. Ideally, I'd say one space to one project, and you have a project that maps onto a company project. Now there are absolutely things that don't map well onto that. For example, just small pieces of ongoing work. For that, we'd suggest using something like a small changes project, for example, whereby there really is no beginning, middle and end to it. There's just literally a stream of things happening all the time. If you have live product projects, of course, which are ongoing, in that case, we would still suggest actually having product-oriented work, if you like, going into a product-oriented project. Again, all these things sort of tend to vary from client to client, but there's a few rules of thumb. So how can we improve our reporting and visualization across in this sort of scenario where we're a bit more complicated? Well, look, I've got, for example, 3 teams here, and we've provided a work in progress board for each of those teams. You can have more boards if you want, of course. And those boards actually pull in work from all the projects that are relevant for these teams to work on. Okay. For a project manager, approaching this from the other end, individual project managers can look at maybe projects that relate to them, and overall multiple projects, we can really think about the concept of project portfolio management, which maybe a program manager is actually wanting to look at. And there's a few different ways of doing this. And I've built towards this because some of the steps I've just alluded to help us move towards this end goal. So how might you do this? Well, step 1, if you don't want any add-ons to do it, and again, it depends on your requirements. Once we've got Jira into sort of consistent shape, we can use actual additional custom boards specifically filtered for reporting across multiple Jira projects. And we've got all the other features in Jira that you know about, releases, fixed versions and so forth, and we can pull those in. Now, what level these boards and dashboards may operate at will depend on the needs of individual project managers. But we sometimes see people at that level still working with Excel and PowerPoint, and really if you could report across Jira, you can get a much better live view really of what's going on. There are also a couple of add-ons, one by Atlassian, one by a third-party vendor called Software Plant, which can also make life easier, Jira Portfolio and Big Picture. So I'm going to mention a couple of things about both of these products. It's not really enough time to go into an in-depth demo of both. We probably need another hour for that. But again, if you're interested, get in contact and we can follow up with you. A Big Picture is a really good add-on made by a company called Software Plant. You could think of it as effectively as a custom reporting layer. You can create programs within it. So big picture can have the idea of multiple programs, and in each of those programs you can pull in the projects that are relevant to those programs. It's got visualizations in it that frankly help with either single or multiple project management as things get more tricky, and it's really there, I think, to help managers more so. It can support agile or waterfall methods, because it's really a sort of a layer that sits on top of Jira that you can configure to show you information that's relevant for what you need. It supports, I mean, on the subject of Agile, it does support SAFe. It's got a special SAFe view in it, and SAFe scheduled Agile framework, by the way. So this concept of multiple Jira Agile teams maybe working to a similar cadence, maybe sprinting at the same time, and all that work goes together to create a single program. And it allows also the concept of multiple programs to be managed. Here's an example of one of the screens from it. This is its famous, that's where it originally came from, a Gantt screen. And this has got a whole bunch of issues from, in this particular case, one project, but these issues can come from many projects. So, and they can also, by the way, be viewed at different levels. So, for example, you could have a view which is solely initiatives and epics. You can have your own hierarchy in there, depending on how you want to sort of structure your work, maybe programs, initiatives, projects, for example. And in here, I can see you can have a sort of clear visualization about what needs to be done, when, how long things might take, what dependencies exist. You can also have the idea of dummy tasks in here as well. So as a manager, if you just want to create things and stick them in, if you like, as placeholders, you can do that too. And it's got a bunch of other things to do with it. The scope, which is determining what data comes in. A roadmap, which is again a high-level view of what you're going to see. And resourcing is all about who's going to work on these things. Okay, so it's quite a nice, actually quite a nice add-on, I think. Jira Portfolio. This is very, very oriented. This is by Atlassian, and this is very, very Jira oriented and very agile in nature, in my opinion. It's really good at rolling up data from underlying projects. And that's, so it'll roll up things like story points or estimated hours. So you could say, for example, if something needs to be released at the end of the month, but all the story points, you know, across maybe multiple projects, what it can then do, for example, is sum up all those story points, look at the amount of resource you've got working against them and determine if you're going to get it in time. But it really does like you to work in an agile way, I think, and it also rewards consistency. If you have all your Jira projects underneath it working in different fashions, and it's more difficult to get information out, and it could affect the reporting. Here's an example of a program, and you can see in here we've got a bunch of initiatives, and if you broke those down you'd see epics underneath them, and we've got some epics in here as well. So the idea is here I can actually create, for example, a program, may have multiple initiatives in it, and I can actually pull and get a view of data. And we can see here it's still very sort of Jira oriented really, whereas Big Gantt looks quite different. And if we carry on, drill into what actually a program looks like in Portfolio, what a plan looks like, rather than Gantt's and dependencies, here we can see we've got the idea of a scope. We've got a clear idea using Jira releases across the top. So we can see on this date, Android's got to be released, on this date, iOS has got to be released. And these bars are actually the epics that are going across these dates. So you can plan the begin and end of your epics and see where they are in terms of your releases. And if the sum of your story points adds up to an excessive amount for the resource you've got, maybe your releases will turn red, indicating you can't quite hit them. And beneath this, we can see the scope. We can see here there are a bunch of epics across different Jira projects that go into this program plan. And I can see the releases these epics relate to and the story points. And these story points will be summed up from the things that are beneath them. So that's a really short taster of the overall solution, and I'd like to say that to manage multiple projects in Jira, think about how you work, how your projects are structured, how your teams are structured, who needs reports and why. Have your teams actually got a view of what they are doing work-wise? Have your project managers got a view of are their projects going to be delivered or not? And you can do quite a lot with Jira's built-in features around its own boards if you've got Jira laid out in a way that maps on well to how you're managing work. And then there are a couple of add-ons, Portfolio and Big Picture, that can help you provide with higher level cross-project visualizations where you can build up program level views. And these are really all about trying to help you manage at a high level. But as you can hopefully see from those two examples I've given, they work in quite a different way in terms of their visualization. One is more of a layer you put on top and configure and display data how you want to display it. That's big picture. I'd say portfolio is more a question of rolling up all the underlying Jira projects into a high-level view. But if you're going to do that, it really is important you use Jira in the way it's designed. Otherwise, your reporting at the top level won't be so hot. Clearly, it's quite a big subject, and if you want to talk about it more, please get in touch with us afterwards. We're looking at starting a series of webinars. Basically, we're going to do a time management one to be decided when, but this also comes up quite a lot. How can you log time that your staff are spending on things? A couple of applications for that. You need to track CapEx on development project work, because finance can then actually set it on the balance sheet, and that can be a very important thing for software companies to be able to do. Service companies need to track work so they can bill customers regularly, and we would typically use Tempo timesheets for that. It works very, very well. So we'll put that out there as another webinar soon. Again, please let us know if that's of interest. The layout, if you like, the work patterns we've just described will work well with Tempo timesheets. So if tracking work is something you're interested in terms of tracking time rather, it's also worth considering actually how well Jira is structured based upon your work patterns and requirements. Anyway, that concludes today's webinar. Apologies, we've gone 3 or 4 minutes over. I hope you found it interesting. If you've got any questions or you want to go into something in more detail, do please let us know and get in contact. Many thanks.